Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. Welcome to this week's live chat. I'm super excited to be here to share some pictures of quilting, answer your questions live, and this time I have a giveaway as well, which I'll tell you about here in a second. I've got some news and then pictures of a quilt. I'm going to be showing you some in-progress photos of a quilt I just recently finished up for Tula Pink. So a lot of stuff going on. I wasn't here last week because we had quilt walk and classes and all sorts of events, and it was an amazing time. I can't wait to share pictures and stuff with you about that, but it's still a little bit of a blur. It was a busy week. And on top of all that, all the panels for the challenge were delivered on Thursday and Friday. So my whole staff has been so busy doing all the things. So we're super excited to finally get that going as well. So anyway, real quick about the challenge, that's that video series that's coming up starting July 9th, where I'm going to share some of my favorite quilting designs for some common quilt blocks. And throughout the video series, we'll be watching them put together with a sewing machine and quilting on a long arm. I'll give you variations. It's just a really fun time, and as always, totally free. So looking forward to doing that. But I do have great news because the challenge products are shipping now, and that says shipping soon. When I did that graphic, it was soon, but we got our panels in, and I'm pretty sure every order has gone out. If not, almost every order has gone out. So it's not too late to place your order and quilt along with us on those exclusive panels. Again, not required, but really nice to go ahead and already have the background to quilt on, and when you're done, you have a beautiful quilt that you can either hang on the wall or put in the dog bed, depending on how you feel about it. No, put it on the wall. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited about this whole video series coming up. The panels are available in 2 sizes, and you can get the optional borders and other products as well. You can click the link in the description box below for all the information. It will show you where to go, and all those videos will be on my YouTube channel and my website. So again, that's starting July 9th, which I can't believe it's already the middle of June, the middle of the year. Like, it just keeps flying by. So it's just crazy. Also, this last weekend we had our quilt walk, and part of that quilt walk is our big, like Jessica said, it's like our Super Bowl. It's our big outdoor event, and throughout the wandering around the town, you collect the pieces of the pattern, and I actually have the pattern available for purchase. So if you have been dying to get that quilt, but you weren't able to make it to Quilt Walk, you can purchase that. There's a link below. One lucky quilter or one lucky viewer is going to win this pattern. So leave a comment if you're watching live, telling Jessica hi, and she'll pick a winner for that pattern. Again, that's in the description box below if you want to check that out. So really fun. And it's hilarious that the quilt I'm going to show you that Tula did is called Blooming Bouquet. And this pattern I did is in bloom. So it's a little confusing. The free pattern is for my quilt. The quilt I'm going to show you today is a different quilt. It's for Tula. So quilting for Tula Pink is so much fun. We have such a good repertoire now that we have worked together so long. I was talking about it at a dinner thing I was having on last Saturday. I was pregnant with my youngest daughter when I quilted the first quilt for her. And I just remember praying that I would not go into labor before this quilt was finished because it was for Quilt Market. So that's how long we've been together. Haley is now 15. So we can just measure our friendship through that. And over the years, I mean, I've quilted so many quilts for her, I can't even begin to count it. And this recent one was a lot of fun. And now that I do these live chats, I try to take in-progress photos or, share some tidbits, the process of it. And 2 weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that seems like a blur, I did a live chat on how to prevent getting unstuck while you quilt. And I used her quilt, up-close pictures of quilting that for the example. So now I get to show you the whole thing. She kind of goes into her whole design process on her Tula Tuesdays, and it was very cool to watch because we're now to the stage of our relationship where she gives me the quilt, I do it and I give it back, and so I don't really know a whole lot of what she was thinking when she designed the pattern, and so it was just kind of fun to hear her thoughts. So let's look at this quilt. First of all, wrong one. First of all, this quilt was humongous, is humongous. It's so cute, so bright and fun, and as soon as I opened it, I'm like, oh my gosh, she gave me solid fabric. Being a pattern designer, she's showing how to use her big, beautiful prints, and this pattern surely highlights that. But when I saw that solid background, I was like, oh, this is going to be a lot of fun. So I took some pictures before I got started. Here's the unquilted quilt. I think it's so interesting. It's hard to imagine a quilt being quilted any other way. So when you see it unquilted, it kind of lets you use your imagination. The first thing that I noticed is with all that beautiful background, I knew I was going to have fun with the quilting, but it's not huge areas of background. And they were all kind of irregularly spaced. I mean, in the fact that it's not like I have one long rectangle. So immediately as I'm loading that quilt, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to do something that can bend and move around, something that goes with flowers. So I'm kind of thinking through that. And here I have it loaded and ready to go. I quilt all her quilts on the long arm. That's my first, I like to say it's like my first language, or that's what I'm more comfortable with. Plus, I can get them done so much quicker. One question that came through the live chat, or the type chat before I went live, was Kim asked, do I float my quilt tops? And I do, and you can see that right here. Floating my quilt tops on my long arm means that quilt top is not pinned to the bar, it just hangs down. I do all my quilts like this because A, it's quicker, and also B, I can access underneath the quilt sandwich should I need to smooth out batting or something like that. So here this quilt is loaded, and usually when I have her quilts, there's kind of a time crunch, so I'm like, okay, not a lot of like waffling. I just gotta kind of jump in there and go for it. The first thing I noticed was, besides the negative space or that background area, that the tops of her flowers didn't have actual flowers. There were the stems. The way the patterns went, or the pattern is written, it looks like it's kind of floating off of there. So I thought, okay, I'm definitely going to quilt a little flower right there. And it was so fun in her talk when she pointed that out and noticed it. You know, I put all these little details in there, and you're just glad that they noticed them. Kind of fun. All right, and then I also knew with these big, beautiful prints, that would be a perfect opportunity to just quilt along the lines that she has put on there for me. She's taken all the time to design that beautiful fabric. I'm just going to quilt along the lines of it and make it easy. So once I kind of had a game plan, all right, I'm going to do some crazy stuff in the background, make the blocks look really cool, and get started. So first, in each of the centers of the flowers, I kind of treated them all a little bit differently. I am easily bored, but I'm easily amused, so it does kind of even out. But I knew that I wanted to do different treatments in each flower. And it's funny because some of the ones that she pointed out I liked, but I liked some of them better. So it's just funny how we all have our own preferences. In this example, I decided to do some kind of geometric quilting just to, I don't know, highlight the center of that block, just having fun with it, and then quilt around some of the lines in the prints. As we go through, you'll see some other textures. This picture is a little bit clearer, but it's just fun to use that area as a way to like think through, what can I do different? What can I do that I haven't necessarily done before? So, and plus, I love to look at her fabrics and all the details that are in there. Sometimes on first blush or when I look at the quilt, I'm like, oh, but when you start quilting, you see all the adorable colors and prints, and I find myself constantly distracted, which is kind of one of the hazards of quilting for Tula. It's like, oh my gosh, look at that. That's so cute. Of course, I'm talking to myself in my quilting room, which might be why none of my family comes in, because they're like, oh, mommy's being crazy again. Around the petals, I kept that quilting fairly simple. Just did some echoing, some wishbones. I think I did some flower or feathers in some of them. Just nothing too crazy because it wasn't a huge area. And so, plus, with all the quilting I was going to do in the background, I needed a little bit of an easier spot. Then I went ahead and started at the top. So I kind of started in the busier print just to kind of get warmed up. And then I went ahead and quilted in the ghost flowers, or the flowers there. And so, again, so amusing. It took a little bit of time, but it was only 3 of them. So nothing I was like, it wasn't anything difficult that I was committing to for the whole quilt. So here, just kind of quilting that little bit and then quilting the area like it was an actual flower. So some of the designs that I used in the blocks. So again, so fun. On this quilt, I used white thread, and I don't normally do that. White on white is really hard to see. And sometimes I want to show up, but since I knew I was gonna be doing a lot of quilting in the background, I went ahead and went with a thread that ultra matched so that it would not overwhelm or be too fussy. If I wasn't going to do this kind of quilting, I might have went with like a light yellow or even a light pink. I have used that on her quilts before, and oh, it's so pretty. But anyway, this one is with white thread, and there's the last flower, so cute little guys. I loved in her Tula talk where she talked about the leaves being curled over. I thought that was kind of fun. I didn't realize that's what that was, but I did like hearing that story. All right, with that irregular background area, I knew that I couldn't do something that really had to be rigid. I needed something that could flow and move in and out of areas, and I decided to do the swirl chain. This is one of my favorite designs because it's actually quilted in sections, even though it looks continuous, and there's so many different ways that you can, enhance it, or so many different things you can do to like kind of give it a different look. So I decided to quilt this swirl chain so that it would kind of wrap in and around the flowers, kind of come up from some of the flowers. There was no rhyme or reason. I didn't plan out where they were going to go. I just kind of thought, oh, well, I haven't done one in a minute, so let's put one here. And it's funny because as I worked my way down the quilt, the swirl chain, they all looked a little different. Some of them had leaves, some had paisleys. I just tried to switch them up as I went. And what I also love about the swirl chain design, it's a fast design to quilt once you get the hang of it. There's no traveling, so it's just kind of a lot of echoing and filling in that area. And I just put my headphones on, get my wine, which is way behind me, not by the quilt, and I just have a good old time quilting it. So here, I hope my photos don't mess up. I took a little progress photo or video, and you can see where I just finished the very top. So there's some of those swirl chains, all that dense filler. I loved, kind of using the quilting to add this texture. But again, since I use the white thread, it doesn't overwhelm the quilt, in my opinion. Now, in this video, there is some side light, so it's easy to see the quilting, but when you're actually looking at it, it's not like it's over the top. So my kind of process was, all right, I've got my plan. Now I need to quilt because this thing needs to be done. And so quilting those swirl chains, like here you can kind of see they're coming from the flower. And then I didn't always make them run into another flower. I just kind of, played around with it and had fun with some different textures. But I decided that if it ends, like if it doesn't look like it's running into something, I'll just put a feather around the outside and that will be like the bloom. So the idea being like these are vines that crawl all around the quilt, and where it ends, there will be a feather. So I don't know. That's some deep thinking. I love to overthink the quilting, so there's that. But kind of see the progress pictures there. And then in the rest of the quilt, some filler just to make those swirl chains pop out and really kind of make the rest of the blocks look great. Of course, let's be honest, these blocks, there's nothing I can do to make them look bad. They are amazing, and all that neon fabric was pretty cool to look at too. So again, I didn't want the quilting to take away from it, but picking designs was a lot of fun. So I took this picture because when you float your quilt top, you can see exactly how much you have done. And once the quilt comes off the floor, that is such a big moment for me because that means I'm nearing the end. So sometimes when people ask if I float my tops, sure, it's quicker and I can access the quilt, but also for me, it's kind of like motivational to see it advance and kind of see exactly how much I have left. So I was pretty excited that I was getting somewhat close to the end. And then these pictures just kind of show you the different variations that I quilted of the swirl chain. I tried to make them all a little different from each other. I tried not to make anything too regular in their placement. I think if there's not a pattern, then you kind of just see the overall texture and it doesn't stand out as much. And so here you can see it's kind of winding around, throwing in some little things here and there. But let's be honest, quilting all, those swirl chains is much quicker than the filler I'm putting around it. So I tried to make them nice and big to fill in that area. Then to really help them pop out, which I don't know if you can really see in this picture, I used pebbles. Now pebbles are those little round guys to really kind of put them up next to that swirl chain. It just makes it pop out, gives it contrast. But those are very tedious to quilt and they get kind of boring, and I feel like you don't need them all over the whole quilt. So I quilted those pebbles around the swirl chain, but once I moved away from that area, then I went to a different filler. So I got kind of the emphasis of the pebbles and then switched it out with leaves and swirls and just some different textures and designs. So instead of quilting pebbles everywhere, just a little bit around the swirl chain and then switch to a different design. And then in the stems, that fabric, oh, her stripe fabric is so beautiful. And so she fussy cut it so it made that beautiful stripe. So I just stitched along the lines of the print. Real easy way to kind of get back and forth around that flower, but really cute and nice and simple compared to the filler. And then I took some pictures of the swirl chain, so just kind of to see how this would evolve. So I start with my first swirl and then I echo, echo, echo. I'm not going to get too teachy, but you know, if you're going to quilt this, don't be afraid to extend it in the area and use that echoing to build it up. It just gives your brain a chance to catch up with your hands. Have you ever been quilting and your hands are like, I don't know where I'm going? Then from that first one, I'm going to start quilting another little swirl and then I branch off of it. So these are like swirl connectors or swirl sections that kind of connect to each other, and echoing is what makes them all kind of look continuous. So you can see quilt the swirl, echo, echo, echo. You can probably pretty much guess the rest of this design. And then again, extending that swirl out, filling in that area, and then echoing, echoing, echoing. Very echo heavy design. I like to say echoing is your best quilting friend. Won't help you make dinner, but it will help you build up your design quickly. So here's, you can see more echoing, more swirls. And then where the swirls turn away from each other, that's where I would put any details if I wanted to add some pieces of a feather or a leaf or a paisley, whatever whim caught my eye or passed my fancy. So here you can see a couple of those feathers. I really like those feathers because they're a little bit bigger unquilted and they kind of pop out compared to even the swirl chain. And then I would just put a couple here and there and everywhere. This particular swirl chain I quilted so it looks like it's running into the block. I didn't do that every time, but I did love kind of throwing that in there so that maybe it made kind of a secondary pattern where it might look like they were going behind the flower or what have you. Again, I'm having way too much fun quilting it at this point because I'm making up all these stories about it. And then once I run it into that block, I'm just going to echo, 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 and kind of get that illusion that it's going behind there. So if you watched 2 weeks ago, my live chat, this picture might look familiar because I talked about how I used traveling to kind of work my way around an area. I wasn't always able to quilt without stopping and starting a new line of quilting, but most of the time I could figure it out. So I got to the other side and then echoed to build it up. And you can see that beautiful swirl chain right there. What I love about the swirl chain is if one side looks a little puny or it's not even, I can just add some more echo lines, use the quilting to build it up, and then put my filler around it. So in all these sections, the swirl chains went in first, kind of guided by the blocks themselves. Sometimes they came from behind a flower, sometimes they came from a stem. I imagine that they were wild, swirl chains, that they were not cultivated. They're just growing wherever. And then there you can see the filler I put around it. Those pebbles up by the swirl chain, and then again for the filler, leaves and swirls and things that are beautiful, consistent spacing to give it that nice texture, but that I can quilt fairly quickly to kind of help, get this thing over with, get it finished as much as possible. So again, I just took some other photos. Here's another swirl chain looking like it's running behind the block. Again, it's not necessary, but I find it so amusing. And then around the outside, just kind of quilting that swirl chain almost like a border. So it connected, but went off and on, just depending on how much room I had, how much, whatever I was thinking at that point. And then in the leaves, you can see here, I went with some geometric quilting designs. I liked a little bit of contrast. So one thing you might hear me say in our upcoming video series, Free Motion Challenge, is when I'm picking designs, the rule I give myself is I like to pick one design, and then the next design, I pick a contrasting one. So if I'm doing swirls, I'll do geometric. If I'm doing boxes, I'll do pebbles. It's not like a artistic thing. That's just one little tip that helps me pick a design. So by keeping the quilting not fussy in those leaves, I allowed it to kind of, again, pop up compared to the swirl chain. Let me use my ruler, a little bit different. And you can see I've reached the bottom. This is where things get so exciting. I'm like, yes, it's almost done. I love starting a quilt and I love finishing a quilt. And so it's fun to see it progress through my long arm in sections, but I don't get the whole view of what the whole thing looks like until it comes off. And so I'm always excited when it comes off the machine. And you can see more there. So at this point I'm done, and I went and hung it up and took some pictures so you can see some of the quilting there. There's nothing wrong with having a plan. I could have definitely planned out where those swirl chains were going to go. I could have marked the spine, but I let them evolve. I let them just kind of go everywhere. I think it's important to quilt within your personality, and I don't have a problem just kind of thinking, I'm going to put this here. One thing I will do is if I know I want to put something somewhere, I'll put like a marked line just to remember, don't quilt here, because this is where something is going. But it's kind of fun to see the whole finished thing. Her quilts are so heavy because we use 2 layers of batting, and that's what gives that quilting a lot of definition, plus the side light that I'm shining on it. But it's just, it's so fun to see the finished thing. And it's usually about this point that I wonder, if I kept this quilt, could Tula track me down and get it? Like, is our friendship worth me keeping the quilt? Sometimes I think I might like to keep the quilt. No, I'm just kidding, but it is kind of fun. It's like having, this is going to sound weird, it's like having foster kids. They come in my life for a while, I give them love, and they go back to their parents, and every once in a while I get to see them on down the road. So I do love, seeing the quilts or seeing her on the Tuesdays and like, oh yeah, that's right, I did that one. And then in most of those bigger flowers, I just quilted along the lines that she gave me. Here, beautiful flowers, beautiful texture, just using the quilting to show off what she's already did the work for. Again, it's a nice big quilt, and you can see, this is actually the side, but I turned it. There was a question, this is a great question. Kim asked, if you're trimming up your quilt, how do you keep the stitches along the edge from unraveling? So notice here along the edge, I quilt right off of the edge. Because if she needs to square it up, she is a phenomenal piecer, so there's no really any squaring up that she needs to do. But I don't want any gaps between the quilting and the edge of the quilt. So that quilting runs right off the edge. When I trim the quilt flush to the edge, it's time to bind. I try to do it like the same time because that quilting will unravel because you're chopping stitches in half. So if you want to trim your quilt but not bind it, and you don't want those stitches to unravel, doing a seam all the way around will help kind of secure it. But if I'm just trimming a quilt because I'm not going to bind it, but I just need to take pictures, I'll leave a good couple inches of the batting out there. We were joking in my classes. Somebody was like, wow, you skipped not even binding, you even bothered trimming your quilt. And I'm like, well, I didn't want the stitches to come out. So kind of funny. And another question about floating my top. Do I use magnets? I don't use magnets to hold that quilt top in place. I don't use magnets or clamps or anything, but they're definitely helpful if you haven't done it before because it kind of keeps your quilting from sucking up the quilt. And just some more in-progress photos. Again, I think it's so much fun when you can have fun with the quilting, when you can add some different textures, use the quilting to highlight the piecing, but also having a really good time with it. I think I have a full shot here somewhere. Again, lots of fun, beautiful textures in the blocks. And even though it's a block, some of them I quilted like with background designs. Like this is kind of like a edge-to-edge design because it's so pretty and they're nice and big. So you can see the geometric in the petals. Man, I took a lot of pictures of this quilt, but there was a lot of stuff to look at. So you can kind of see here some more of that detail. A lot of fun. Now I think she said it's a free pattern on her website, or free pattern somewhere. So you can go check out her website or her Instagram, find out the details for it. It's Blooming Bouquet. Sorry. But again, I was taking pictures of it and I was having so much fun looking at all those details on there. All right. So lots of, I'm sure, questions, maybe about that. So Tammy had also asked, how do I decide what to put in negative space? That kind of gave a peek into my process there, hopefully a little bit. Question, is it hard to float the quilt? It is not difficult to float the quilt, but you have to manage it as you advance. So if you don't quilt on a long arm, just ignore this for a second. Every time I advance the quilt, I have to make sure that the quilting is not sucking up the inside, because what'll happen is I'll have a quilt that is, the border corners are touching the ground and the center isn't. So you have to, every time you advance, make sure that everything is progressing correctly. That's where those clamps can help, or those magnets to help hold it in place. If you have never tried floating a quilt, I always say try with a baby quilt and see how it works. But you might have noticed on my long arm that I don't even have that third bar. I don't even have a bar on there for the top. I took it off because I just always float my tops there. So how big are the flower centers? They're about this big. I don't know if that's a technical term. I didn't measure them, but they were nice and large. perfect for showing off her prints. It was interesting to hear her process because I never really thought about how, like, designing a quilt pattern that's unique and interesting, but also showcases her beautiful prints. So I thought that was kind of interesting to hear her talk about that. When on my long arm, do I secure the fourth side of the quilt in any way? So the bottom of that quilt top is not secured until it gets to the quilting area. And then once it makes its way up there, then I secure it before I fill it in. So that photo where I said, oh my gosh, I'm almost done, this is so exciting, I had already kind of secured that down and then filled it in. So did I use white thread on the whole quilt? On almost the whole quilt. There were a couple of spots that I came back and switched, especially when we got to like the purpley flowers. So I will switch thread colors to make sure that it doesn't overwhelm the quilt. So I did come back and quilt a couple of those with different ones. What size is this quilt? That's a great question. I didn't measure it. It's very big. It's very, very big. That's all I got. So I don't know. I'll have to look up that information and maybe put it in the comments. How do I tension the top when you float it? We might have to do a whole live chat just about floating the top. What's funny is when I got my very first long arm 21 years ago, the gentleman who set it up, that's how he showed me how to do it. So that's just how I did it. So there is no tension on the top. When I'm working on a long arm, the area that my machine can reach, the quilting area, is the only part I'm worried about. So the rest of it's kind of just hanging there. But as I advance, get to the unquilted area, I stitch down the sides, make sure it's progressing correctly, and then continue on. And like I said, I float every quilt from little to big. When I float the top, how do I deal with the last 6 to 8 inches? Lots of questions. I love it. Once that quilt top, the bottom of the quilt top is now up on my frame, I stitch down along the sides before I fill it in. So kind of like as I'm working my way down the sides, I'm stitching it down, but that last pass, actually the whole thing gets stitched down. And since I'm floating it, I can see how it's progressing. I can make sure, okay, everything is going right because it's progressing correctly. On a sewing machine, you make your quilt sandwich and you lay it all out so you kind of know what you're dealing with right off the bat. On a long arm, not that there's ever been a problem with Tula's quilts, but if there is a problem, I can see it before I get to the bottom. So, any tips for quilting a large quilt on a small domestic machine? So that is the trickiest part, right? You're doing the smush and push. You're wrestling it through there. The best trick I can say, or there's no trick or tip, but the best suggestion I can give is to just focus on the place you're working and reposition your hands often. Keep that quilt up. Don't let it hang off the table. Don't let it, hang under your machine. You want the whole thing kind of up. So like usually I have it like over my shoulder, all wadded up front, and then just kind of progress your way through that way. Do I worry about traveling in the ditch when/if the seams are pressed open? No, I still travel along, or I still stitch along the seam. I'm never going to be so good that I can stitch that whole seam perfectly straight and only catch the threads, right? Like my stitching is not always perfectly on that line, so I don't really worry about that, even if it is an EPP quilt or something like that. So great questions. I hope it was fun to kind of see some in-progress photos and kind of how it all came together. Be sure to check out Tula's Instagram to see a little bit more about her design process. And I think it's just so fun how we're two sides of the same coin, right? She does all this beautiful piecing, fabric designing, and then I get to quilt it. So lots of fun. Don't forget, I have the In Bloom pattern available. But Tina Marie Hill, I don't know if I said that right, Tina Marie Hill won this. So leave a comment with your email address and we'll get that sent out to you. And I am so excited about the Free Motion Challenge starting in just a couple weeks. Don't forget to grab your panels so you can have them in time. I'll be back next Thursday with another live chat, 3 p.m. Central. Not sure what I'll talk about yet, but I'm sure I'll think of something. So until then, everybody, stay safe, happy quilting, and I'll see you next Thursday.